I didn't get your name, I'm sorry. I was saying that this particular project actually came to being as a result of various things coming together. One of which was that after a longish project that I'd worked on seating in India, Dr. Rachel Lee asked me a common friend had said, you know, you guys should meet, you've got a lot in common. And she asked me, I know you're finishing this book on seats of India, but would you be interested to carry on a little bit further and delve deeper into the planter's chair? And as I was telling someone today, you know, when you take out a book, you're like a little lost. It's like, okay, now what? What do I do next? And that nervousness had come in. And when Rachel said, would you like to join? I immediately said yes. So it was wonderful. I'll give you a little bit of a background of our project. To a large extent, I'm not an architect. I'm more of a design historian. But like architecture, furniture and furnishings have reflected the socio-cultural context in which they are produced. So this was true, of course, during the colonial period as well. And in the 19th and early 20th century, the planter's chair, for example, became really an everyday and gendered symbol of colonial leisure, power, and violence. And as the name suggests, it settled on the plantation verandas before making its way to a variety of public and private rooms, including railway stations, libraries, and clubs. I'm just giving you a sort of a small dip into what we had done. We had traveled to various parts of India, to Kolkata, Bombay, Udvada, Navsari, Coonoor, and those pictures right on the top, just taken recently, where architect Sagara kindly took us around right here in Moratuva. We've traveled to Kochi, Coonoor, Chennai, Bangalore, and even to the Netherlands, where we found the chair. The chair obviously has had links to both Dutch and British colonization. Following independence, the planter's chair has continued to inhabit spaces in Sri Lanka, from luxury hotels to domestic interiors. Local carpenters, as was proved today, still make them. Interior designers continue to specify them in their furniture schedules. Today, the chairs are less likely to be surrounded by other features typical of colonial interiors, such as footstools, fly whisks, tea services, oil lamps, or hat racks. So how do they relate to the spaces in which they now sit? What meanings do they hold? The questions I would like to ask our panelists later is, what do they represent? What is the significance of these cultural objects and their continued relevance for contemporary furniture and interior design in Sri Lanka, the subcontinent, and beyond? This image was, I just recently discovered it, and when I showed it to Rachel, she was so excited. She says, all my dreams in one frame, Minute de Silva and a planter's chair. She said, what more can I ask? One of the earliest representations that we came across is this one. It's a painting from the 1850s. Now, the chair's origin stories are hazy. It was probably developed in either the British-controlled West Indies or India in the early to mid-19th century, before spreading widely through other colonial contexts, Dutch, Portuguese, French, and beyond. In locally crafted iterations, it belonged to the background of colonial life. Defying its rather large and ungainly frame, it easily and readily traveled to various geographies. It settled into multiple cultural contexts, and through its various post-colonial excursions, it's absorbed just the right amount of local flavor and nuance to ingratiate itself with diverse communities. We've looked at our research through various lenses. We've looked at images from the archives. We've looked at actually movies. We found it in Malayalam, Dutch, even in Sholay, the famous Bollywood film. So we've seen it in a lot of places. We've looked at it as a museum object. We found it in literature and poems. We've seen it in current use, and we've conducted about 50-odd oral histories. Now, while the chair has been consistently isolated as the planter's chair, the rich repository of audio, visual, and textual material that we collected revealed that it goes by so many other diverse names at different times and at different parts of the world. Its very many names offer a clue to the diverse shifting meanings the chair has embodies, the many lives it has led, the many places it has traveled to, and the various people it has seated. The names also indicate its absorption into various cultural contexts. The chair, in a sense, did unsettle us, and in many ways reflected not only its diverse uses, but also the contradictions inherent in colonial life. We are no longer sure how to refer to it, and following the footsteps of a famous musical artist, we are tempted to call it the chair formerly known as the planter's chair. I'm curious if someone here in the audience would like to just articulate what they feel is wrong with this picture. Or maybe we can talk about this later. Anyone? What do you think? No? Mm-hmm. Anyone wants to? We can talk about this later. Okay. Now, early in our research, we kind of decided to establish the boundaries of our investigations, and we decided to enumerate the chair's tangible characteristics. We found that a classic chair is distinguished by these long arms that reach out to provide leg rests and a continuous sloping cane seat. However, a chair without retractable arms, is that still representative of the chair? So we decided that, as long as the chair had a low seat, it would be one. Would it have extended arms that work as footrests? Yes, it should. Does the seat and back have to have cane weave? No. We have seen canvas, plastic cane, leather, cloth upholstery. Must the armrest pivot and retract? Not necessarily. Should the armrest be flat? We've seen these lovely curved versions, as you see on top. Should the seat and back be a continuous weave? Not necessarily. Sometimes you come and see them in separate panels. While it seems to be all about the arms, we wonder what it is to be, what makes the chair what it is. What non-physical qualities or traits must a chair possess in order to be considered as an example of the chair? Is it its association with the leisure characterized by a colonial lifestyle? Is it its ability to command respect and power by virtue of its huge frame? Is its connection to all things grandfatherly? Is it to the nostalgia of holidays and times? Is it its ability to recall better times when there was a generosity of space and times? And we found that it was its names that offered some sort of a clue to this. And while some descriptive names reference its physicality and form, some connect to communities and to places. We, of course, found that it's, beyond its physical features and symbolic roles, we found that its connection to the colonial plantation was central to understanding its legacy. The chair was clearly a mainstay in the lives of many planters, found in verandas, interior spaces. It appears in photographs and personal reflections. Yet, it was actually not called the planter's chair by the planters themselves. Instead, it was sometimes referred to as the easy chair, perhaps making planter's chair an example of sort of naming that was imposed by outsiders. The use of the name easy chair to describe the chair seems to have been widespread in India at the turn of the century. In Berbice, where the chair is known as the Berbice chair and is associated with sugar plantations, its associations are not as positive. In fact, in a short story, the protagonist is puzzled by a man's reaction to what she perceives as a beautiful chair. She asks outright, "What is this chair to you?" It's anger, terror, and sadness, a lot of sadness. We've also, as I said, found it in places like in a poem. It's called the Moonshine, and I'll read some parts of it. It says, "The air is cool, night is clear, moon is bright and round, all still, I cannot even hear the tom-tom's horrid sound." It goes on to say, "Suppressing the irritating hum that wells from the bazaar, I'll meditate. Hi, chokra, come and bring me a cigar. The teapoy and the long armchair, I'll also have a drink. I hope the water's iced with care, now go and let me think." So there's a lot in poems like this that actually self-reference the sort of slight discomfort that colonial British and others felt. There was a sense of discomfort with the strange lat that they've come to. And yet they also, you can see from the posture and the drawing of the paint that accompanies the poem that the man's looking up, not even looking at the person who's serving him. However, the chair did move out of colonial plantations and into local ones. It provided repose on the verandas of spice growers in northern Kerala, for example. In these communities, which included Syrian Christians and Hindus from North and South Malabar, it was referred to as the Charu Kasera. The Charu Kasera, literally when you break it down, means leaning down. Kasera is chair. The word Kasera comes from the word cadeira, which is the Portuguese word for the chair. Very soon in post-colonial settings, the chair also appears to lose formality, not only in usage, but also in nomenclature, while nonetheless commanding aram, or ease from those who sit on it. The aram kursi, or relaxation chair, say called so in Bengal, the kursi malas, or lazy chair, and kursi santai, or relaxation chair from Indonesia. Perhaps it's related to the Dutch name duurstoel, or lazy chair, as well as the Charu Kasera, are all named after the way people interact with the chair. However, our oral histories reveal that for some, the chair was associated with pleasant recollections rather than adverse ones. Many mentioned that these were chairs belonging to their grandfathers, as I had a conversation even today with one of the faculty members here. Even while women in the household were tacitly restricted from using them, children were indulged by their grandpeas and allowed to use the chair for pretend play. Meher Dadaboy, a counselor based in Bombay and a member of the Parsi community, recalls sitting in the chair when her grandfather was occupied elsewhere. We all sat in them, she says, but it was his spot in the house. Her grandmother, who wore the traditional Parsi sari, preferred an upright chair, and it was only much later that westernized women sat in the chair. This image is not of Meher Dadaboy's grandfather. It is a clip from a movie called Elipatayam, which is a Malayalam film by Adur Balakrishnan, where the protagonist is seen to a large part, about 90% of the movie is him sitting on this chair. Meher also admitted that she was surprised to learn that other communities in India also identify closely with the chair, as she has always considered it an exclusively Parsi chair. I do think of it as a Parsi chair, she said. In fact, just now, when you said Kerala and all, I was thinking back and, I thought I've never associated it with another community. I don't know why I didn't. We spoke also to archaeologist Andre Baptista, an East Indian and resident of Kotachi Wadi, a small historical neighborhood in Mumbai, who also spoke of pleasant memories surrounding the chair. For us as children growing up, you take two planters' chairs and draw them close together to create a boat, and the extendable arms would then become your oars. He also believes that the chair is closely connected to the veranda as an architectural detail and a place for susegadu or a siesta in blissful laziness. In his oral history, Andre also mentioned another of the chair's many names, the Bombay fornicator. He recalls his parents and older generations using this term when he was a child, though at the time he had no understanding of its implications. To him, it was simply a fun-sounding word, and he innocently repeated. This name perhaps highlights the chair's capacity to shift so easily from ease to sleaze. The 18th edition of Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable includes Bombay fornicator as one of its 4 entries on Bombay, defining it as an Anglo-Indian term denoting a wicker chair with an extended footrest long enough to facilitate sexual intercourse. With its links to power and authority, it's not difficult to imagine the chair being used as a prop in sex games. However, given the inherent iniquities of colonial society and the chair's staunchly gendered associations, it also raises uncomfortable questions about consent, sexual violence, and abuse. While a planter's chair by any other name could be as comfy or uncomfortable as the next, to many who have memories of exploitation on plantations, The official moniker is unsettling and upsetting. As one of our respondents states, why would you call it that? People don't know what happened on plantations. In many ways, most widely used name, the planter's chair, is actually no less offensive than the satirical one, Bombay fornicator. So is it time to rename the chair? As we grapple with the legacies of exploitation and inequality embedded in its most common name, the planter's chair, perhaps it's time to retire this title and adopt a title that reflects a more complex, a shared history, indeed, to reintroduce the chair by another name. And I have here an image of a chair redesigned by a group from Pune. It's called the Ayama chair. Thank you very much for your time and for listening to us. If you're interested, do follow us on our Instagram page. I'd like to invite Pauletta to speak to us a bit. Need the image going. Sorry. Shall I play it? Shall I play it? Yeah.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure. I start with a video work that I made recently. It's without sound and takes about 9 minutes, after which I will speak a bit about it. So this work was recently created in the context of my PhD research that I conducted at the Department of Architecture and Urban Planning at Ghent University in Belgium. And my PhD centers around late colonial architecture and domestic cultures in Java, Indonesia, through an artistic or critical mobilization of the colonial archive. And the strategies and methodologies I develop and use in working with the archive are embedded and part of my artistic practice. Through artistic practice, I try to kind of occupy a liminal space between theory and fiction, and practice that works critically around coloniality, with the intention to question the normative set of Western attitudes, values, and ways of knowing that serve and continue to serve to rationalize Western dominance in the world. So I'm interested in kind of opening up and complexifying the findings, or finding other ways of researching in order to be able to discuss and disseminate scholarly work, specifically on architecture and colonial history in a different way. I would say that archives are very important in my work, but of course they are also very problematic. In doing this kind of research, researching colonial history, we often turn to the archive as an unavoidable source of information, while at the same time, of course, this archive is very much a product of the colonial past, which represents the very forms of domination, control, etc. Their presumed authority and systems of taxonomy, classification, categorization, they all bring to the fore a body of codified and standardized beliefs that kind of cluster and testify to the links between controlled cultural and moral values, secrecy, law, and power. And over the years, and in line, of course, also with current scholarship, my attention has kind of shifted from viewing the archive as a simple source of knowledge retrieval to considering them as contested sites of knowledge production. A site, as I also came to understand it, where interior frontiers are produced and reproduced. Interior frontiers is a political concept used by the French philosopher Etienne Balibar to kind of understand how people internalize moral and ethical values and how they translate to certain behaviors, often by creating imagined communities in which an us is contrasted with a them. And the concept of interior frontiers has been linked to coloniality in the work of Anne Laura Stoller. For her it strongly informed her thinking about racialized forms in which colonial governments operate, as well as also the unspoken and implicit distinctions in which racisms invest today. For me, interior frontiers kind of ties together the subjects of coloniality, architecture, and the archive. And I use it, the concept, like basically spatializing the concept of interior frontiers and situating it within the colonial context by projecting the internalized borders back into the material and built environment has become of a key strategy for me to understand better how the constellations of colonial power also work through space. As the video work also shows, I try to use the colonial strategies of dissecting and separating, taking apart the colonial house room by room and excavate kind of its micro-narratives of spatial detail, organization and use as a kind of counter-strategy to research the colonial modes of operation. Ariella Aisha Azoulay has aptly observed that, and I quote, "The right to dissect and study people's worlds and render their fragments into pieces to be meticulously copied is taken for granted." The process of dissecting by following the particular histories of different spaces and objects in the colonial house becomes kind of an act of rewinding and replaying colonial life in a different conditionality. In Java, for example, the Dutch colonizers had persistent ideas of how to live in the tropics, as is evidenced by numerous handbooks and advice manuals from the first half of the 20th century, which all center around the inhabitable house as a key feature of maintaining a modern and Dutch lifestyle in a foreign environment. And the relationship between personal habits, lifestyle, and morality is made explicit in these manuals in sections devoted to hygiene, practices of maintaining health, energy, and morale for oneself and one's family members in the tropics. Another aspect that played a dominant role in the first discussions on the ideal house for the colonizer in the tropics, which became more and more the actual subject of my, or the content maybe of my PhD research, was the discourse of hygiene and medical science and the introduction of modern technologies. And in the late 19th and early 20th century, the colonization of the body through direct and indirect interference on life and lifestyles. Think of vaccinations, quarantine, autopsy, disinfection, or of private housing, slum clearance, etc. So the colonization of the body proceeded alongside the colonization of the territory, and hygienists were very keen in demonstrating the link between unsanitary environments and the spread of infectious diseases such as cholera, pest, malaria, etc. And so all these ideas, you could say, were kind of internalized by the colonizer in arriving there in a foreign environment, and the house played a key role in the idea of protecting the colonizer's life. So all these ideas were actually reflected in the designs of the colonial houses and in the domestic cultures and ways of living. The video work, I will ask maybe, could we play it again? The video work, can we play it again? Okay. Because maybe, I don't know if it was clear for you, but actually we move through a colonial house and I zoom in or I focus on particular objects in the house. So it starts in the garden which is actually the first, let's say, safe space around the house. There's a front garden and a back garden. In the front, it's very much directed towards display, and it goes from this tamed culture or nature into the liminal space of the veranda. And the veranda, of course, is a space that is both inside and outside, a room, if you will, without a fourth wall. It is typically fully furnished, at least in the Dutch colonial context, and it's the space where guests are received. So you would find a number of furnitures, typically a round table with rocking chairs. So the planter's chairs I haven't come across a lot, but rocking chairs and forms of a lazy chair in which you can stretch the full body. They are all there on the veranda, but also a table and regular chairs. So very much a space where people are received, but also where you can be seen from the street, and where you can play with the idea of semi-private and public space. From the veranda we go into the inner gallery, which sometimes is more like a gallery, but sometimes or a gallery, I should say, corridor, like a corridor towards the back, on which the rooms, the bedrooms are connected. But sometimes it's also actually a living room. The second space in the house that is semi-public, so still a space that in which people were received, but also where more private furniture and displays were housed. As you can see also, the objects and furniture that is in the house is, I mean, for me, they are very recognizable as Dutch furnitures, but it's also super disconnected to the environment because they are heavy furnitures, like curtains and everything that actually feels as something that is disconnected from the tropical environment. There was an urge for the Dutch to kind of over-equip themselves, also to kind of feel grounded, I guess, and all the furniture and objects are very much directed towards display. So you see, also portraits of family members, paintings with Dutch landscapes, and so on. All objects that remind the colonizer of the place that they left behind, and makes a tangible link also to people that they left behind and to the home country, or the metropole, as it is also called. If we move further towards the back, you have, of course, the bedrooms, with a particular furniture that you saw also, which is the klamboe. For me, the klamboe represents very much, or is kind of a metaphor of the colonial house in itself, because it's how do you say, a fabric that closes off or protects the body from insects and so on. But at the same time it's open, and it brings everything like smell or sound, or it's open to that. And of course the colonial house is like that too. And many of the furnitures are like that too. So they are open and at the same time protecting. In the very back of the house, you have the back gallery, and in the end, there is a separate building, the annex, that houses the kitchen, also often the bathroom, and the services of the house, basically. So the storage space and the servants' rooms. So you can clearly see also the hierarchy of the colonial society reflected in the house itself, with the main house for the family, the colonial family, and the annex in the back for the servants. But of course the annex, you could argue, is the actual heart of the colonial house. Without the annex, you don't have a colonial house, basically. And then in the video work, I tried to bring to the fore kind of strategies of how we look at pictures and how we often are blinded also by the subject of these pictures, which is actually the people, and how if we look around it or try to zoom in on other parts, we can actually create a whole new story and a new way of looking at the history. I used my hands, but that was maybe clear to do that, which also makes it a very personal work in a way. You all look as as a voyeur to the things that I want to show you. Okay, but maybe this is a good moment to move on to the next part of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're also deeply honored to have with us today two distinguished experts whose contributions to Sri Lankan design, architecture, and heritage conservation have been invaluable. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to Deshamanya Vidyajyothi architect Ashley DeVos, Chairman and Managing Director of Ashley DeVos Consultants, whose expertise in traditional and colonial architecture and design has shaped numerous conservation projects across Sri Lanka. Trained at the University of Moratuwa, DeVos has held esteemed positions including council member at the University of Moratuwa, board member at the Arthur C. Clarke Center, and director of UNESCO's cultural heritage projects in Sri Lanka, such as the conservation of Jetavana Stupa and the Galle Fort. His international contributions include faculty roles at conservation institutions worldwide, and he has conducted significant conservation projects across Asia and the Middle East, including structural assessments of heritage sites in Italy, Yemen, and Oman. Thank you so much for taking time to be here with us today. We are equally privileged to have Emeritus Professor Vidyajyothi architect Nimal De Silva, a leading figure on Sri Lankan traditional design, architecture, and culture, whose dedication to heritage conservation and design education has inspired generations. His expertise has extended to national projects, including designing Sri Lankan pavilions for international expos. Today, he continues to inspire future designers and architects as an emeritus professor, embodying a lifelong dedication to education and heritage preservation. And as the founder of our Bachelor of Design degree program, Professor Nimal's presence here today fills us with particular pride and joy as well. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to extend an invitation to all of our panel members to kindly take their seats Here on stage, Sarita Sundar, Pauletta Host, architect Ashley DeVos, and Professor Nimal De Silva. Please do join us on stage, and let's give them a warm round of applause.
Hello. So thank you very much, Ashley sir and Nirmal sir, for joining us today. I had a few questions, if I may ask, and one of them is sort of a question that I'm hoping that all of you on the panel could in some way answer. Specifically, you know, Pauletta, you mentioned the idea of the liminal space. And if you think of the liminal space as a sort of a boundary of two spaces, they're also transition spaces. They, in a sense, smoothen the edge or blur the boundary between spaces. They offer a buffer, but they also, in some ways, help prepare people to a destination of sorts. They are almost like a journey towards a peak of sorts. So the question I ask of you, Ashley sir, is how do architects or how do architectural spaces engage with these liminal spaces? So whether it's the veranda or the passage, and how do they relate? I mean, do people actually become the spaces as they transition? Do you also sort of transition in a sense from where you're coming from in these sort of physical spaces?
Sorry. Can I just move slightly away from your question? Is that okay?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think the examples that we saw of architecture, or so-called Dutch architecture, was from Indonesia. Okay. But if you read Van der Waal, who lived in Indonesia and wrote a book about Dutch architecture, makes a very interesting statement. He says that the Portuguese very quickly understood how to live in the tropics, but the Dutch did not. And in fact, their architecture was totally unsuitable for the tropics. Okay, so that keeps you, puts you somewhere else. But basically, you're looking at a situation where the Dutch were almost permanently installed in Indonesia. I am looking at a Dutch movement in Sri Lanka, and I've studied for a very long time. Now, if I tell you, my research shows that there is no Dutch architecture in Sri Lanka, would it shock you? Yeah.
No, it wouldn't shock me, in fact.
Yeah. Okay, so if it didn't shock you, that's good, because basically what really happened was that, I'm now talking to my students, okay? If you look at the traditional architecture of Sri Lanka, the Dutch did not look at the traditional architecture of Indonesia because they thought they were superior to the Indonesians, so they didn't look at that. If you look at the traditional architecture of Sri Lanka that the Portuguese destroyed, okay, you have a situation where they soon learned later that there is this unique architecture in Sri Lanka which they need to copy. So what happened was, they then used local carpenters and various things like that, and amalgamated with that, and actually brought out the hybrid that you see later on in the being made, right? So that hybrid architecture is actually not Portuguese architecture either. That is a huge local contribution that went into that to produce that hybrid, okay? So if not for that local input, that hybrid would have never come across, okay? Now this I have written about quite a lot and so on, and I made a presentation in Leiden that there is no Dutch architecture in Sri Lanka, and everybody is quite shocked, but that's another story. But Tammy Kroll was very excited about it, and that's another story altogether again. But one of the problems that we had even in the Dutch, when the Dutch was occupying the same areas that the Portuguese were occupying, they used the same sort of expertise to build the houses. Only the scale was different in the Portuguese period, and the scale was the same under the Dutch, okay? The Dutch were traders, and according to their people in Holland, they couldn't spend money. They were not allowed to spend too much money, right? They had to be very careful about the money they spent. So they actually reused a lot of the work that the Portuguese had done. The churches, for example, right? They only built very few churches. The rest were actually, Portuguese churches were readapted as reformed churches and so on, okay? Then we have a situation which is slightly more interesting. Being traders, they need to ensure that their harbors are looked after. So they were building forts. They needed to collect the cinnamon, so they built warehouses, okay? But architecture has nothing to do with buildings. Architecture to do with people. People meaning local people, people who use these buildings. Therefore, we have a situation that's the conclusion I came to. And when the British took over from the Dutch, because there was not even one bullet shot when they took over, it was because of the Treaty of Amiens and so on, they just took over the whole thing. They suddenly found buildings and architecture, right? So what did the British say? This must be Dutch architecture, okay? And so on. It went on like that. And then there were British who wrote about it, calling it Dutch architecture. They never analyzed it, which they should have done, to ensure where the roots were coming from. They didn't. They just said, oh, now people like J.P. Lewis and all has a huge article about this. I have a great-grand uncle of mine who wrote the same damn thing, right? And so on, as Dutch architecture. But actually, if you analyze it, there is nothing. Okay, so that's answer to you. I go on to the planter's chair. I think this is a very bad example of planter's chair. It must be about 20 years old. It's a very crude example. But the first planter's chair that were made, I'll show you. Had another arm like this with a hole in it so that you could put a glass in it. Because the planters drank, they were living in a very cold area. The first planters in Sri Lanka. I'm not talking about India. India would have been the same because the first tea was in Assam, right? So Assam is cold. So these fellows were in the cold forests, of Sri Lanka, because they destroyed all the trees, killed all the elephants, and planted tea, okay? So they were in this, and those houses never had verandas. The veranda came in much later, and actually the concept of the veranda, there are people who have written about it. I won't mention names. I think you all know the names of the people who wrote about it. That the veranda was introduced by the Portuguese. Rubbish. The veranda existed in the Purana Gamas because that was a roof that was necessary to protect the mud wall. And if you did not protect the mud wall, it would get washed in the rain and you wouldn't have a wall left. So you had to protect it. So that concept extended out, became the veranda. And actually people like Kuto and all write about it. He says that the Sri Lankan houses had extensions at the back and extensions at the front. He was actually referring to the veranda. The veranda is a Portuguese word, right? And we just use it as something. But it was not really. So anyway, getting back to, I think we have to change the name of this planter's chair, you know. It doesn't work anymore because the thing got very popular, not in the estates, but when a new Paramparava took over from the British. I won't mention names, there are about 6 families that took over, and they were actually Mudaliers. They were given the Mudaliar title by the Portuguese. Then the Dutch continued with the Mudaliar title. They were actually the people who collected the taxes from the village because these guys couldn't go into the village to collect the taxes. So these Mudaliers were the fellows who collected, and they became very rich. They built these huge houses with huge verandas, and then this chair was brought in, and after a good rice meal, you can put your legs up and sleep. Okay? So that's the Hansiputu actually, which was the concept of this chair. Okay? So, whatever the examples that we've seen, I don't know, but this is my research into this, and I had the privilege of photographing all the chairs in the Goa Museum. I had the privilege of studying and photographing the Brasanda collection. I was able to photograph all the chairs in the Batavia Museum and also in other private museums and so on. Also the chairs in the Philippines, which is also very interesting. So when you look at our furniture, for example, one of the things that happened was when the colonials came into this part of the world, they found that there was timber that could be used to do very fine detailing. There was the ebonies. There was the various other types of timbers, very different to the oaks and all that you find in Europe. You know, oaks are okay for building ships. And then when you look at, say for example, Spanish architecture in the Philippines, it's terrible. They're huge, huge things, like almost like houses, you know, not very fine work. But it was actually the French who brought the fine work into Europe, okay? And then it moved into the Portuguese used it, the Spanish used it, and maybe the Dutch also used it, but actually Dutch took over a lot of work that the Portuguese had done in Sri Lanka, you know? So my take is that it's mostly based on a lot of work I've done, and well, you may not believe it, but it's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would you like to add something to this?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, you must consider this as an opportunity to understand how, by taking one subject, what kind of research that you can do. You know, any subject you take, you search for that, research, you know, go around and see whether, and it's like ocean, you know, everything is there, provided you go and carefully pick it up. In photographic form, verbal form, written form, you know, all kinds of things. That is where the universities should move to understand things by doing research, right? You know, I think all students should consider. Normally, you say when you get reclining chair, what is there to look at? But there are a lot to look at. The social influence, the economy, the craftsmanship, influences. You ask 101 things are there, right? now, at the same time, what Mr. Ashley was telling, my wife, she was the chief architect, State Engineering Corporation. Her thesis subject was Dutch influence on Sri Lankan architecture, but ultimately concluded Sri Lankan influence on Dutch architecture. But we collected information from Batavia and Indonesia and all. Nowhere you get that say type of building that during Dutch period what was constructed in Sri Lanka is found in any other part of the world. Right? Say take their stove extended as a veranda, and we call it sopo. Especially if I talk on the chair, in the tradition, what has happened, we in the East, we sat on the ground, right? Even the king sat on a pedestal seat. The throne was a pedestal, right? Sometimes in the pedestal, you get the backrest called konda, hand rest called say anda, konda and anda, right? In addition to that, say if you look at the stone chairs that we have, right, from maybe 4th, 5th, 6th century downwards, beautifully cut the profile, and it fits the say spine very well, very comfortable to sit, because they sat on the ground, right? If you go to Sigiriya, the Asana Guha, where you get the king's seat, is the throne, and say around that you get the area where the people, ministers sat for the council. Sit on the ground beautifully, and you fit in. They sat right in this country. We have thousands of say Buddha statues. None of those things on a chair. All on a pedestal, right? All on a pedestal, because that is because of the climate. In temperate climate, cold, you can't sit on the ground. We have summer every day, right? Then we can sit on the ground very well. We ate sitting on the ground. I have seen cabinet meetings held by Mrs. Gandhi, seated on the ground, on carpets all over here. There are what you call barrel cushions and all the ministers seated on the ground, because that sitting on the ground, we lost that tradition after colonial. We didn't sit on chairs, right? We had raised platforms to sit. You can sit, you put the leg on there, normally cross leg taken out, because that is the tradition coming in. Then the colonial came in. Colonial, it's a paradise when they came here, right? And they introduced a lot of things, but as what Mr. was telling, and they learned a lot of things from our craftsmen were very skillful. Say, when we looked at Dutch furniture, Dutch period furniture in Gaul, and compare it with Dutch furniture in Kalpiti, Kalpiti is very rough. But Gaul one beautifully carved, beautifully inlaid in a lot of things, because the craftsmen who were there in the Galvadugud and all, excellent traditional craftsmen. So that is how things change. How the colonial introduction came in. I'll give you a good example. Say Rajasingha II, he was against Dutch. Dutch want to get say friendly, so they thought that we should give a good present, and they wanted to give say throne and a crown, gold throne and a crown to the king. Then say normally all our up to Candian period, all our kings sat on a pedestal throne. Then the Dutch governor commissioned royal craftsmen and said, design a chair throne. right? So he produced model about this size, silver, exactly the same thing as what we found in the National Museum, the throne. You know, it's so small, with even the gems studded onto the lion's say eyes, all are there, but size is this much, very precise. Then the order was given, right? Then so by the time he finished it and gave it, the king passed away. So they kept it in the stores for about 6 years, and then decided we should give it to the incumbent, say, king there, Vimaladarma II. So they presented it to Vimaladarma II, both throne and the crown. Right? The crown is about this much, the model, having 17 gems in it, even though it's small, all precise, say, jewelry. Then it was presented, and ultimately it came down from generation to generation, and that is the one that is found in, say, Colombo Museum. So these are the changes that were brought into the chair. And also, say, this is, we call it Hansiputua. Normally, we never had that position, right? We sat, right? We say sleep. That is a different position. Stands, sitting, sleeping. Right? And say, with colonial coming in, so, I found, say, cane chairs were introduced in, say, rest houses. Those are cane chairs, very comfortable to sit. And then hotels with it, say, rear legs moving at an angle, right? They can sit and relax. Not reclining, but it's and it's mainly found in Grand Oriental Hotel, right? Because GOH chair. GOH chair, we signalize it as a Diyat Putua, right? And anything that was, say, acceptable, and they change it to suit our systems. That is how chairs change. And say, this chair was actually usable mainly because we had large verandas. You can have that in Kolkata. And I remember in my both grandparents' houses, there were two, not one, always two. Right? And which, not of that led on to it. Then the spittoon, tall spittoon next to the chair. They all were modified to suit whatever they came. It is a new innovation that came up. You know, whatever thing comes in, we change. You know, say as an example, most of the things were, say, we got it from India, but after some time they changed it beyond recognition. That is what happened. So that is creativity, innovation, and also to suit the present their situations from time to time, you know. And because now you can't sit on the ground and eat, no. You lost it. Sorry, you can't sit on the ground and eat, but you lost it, right? And say these chairs, mainly I found, say, in railway stations. Railway stations, because station master has to wait a few hours till the next train comes, no? So he has to relax. He can't sleep. He can't sit on a chair and wait for a long time. So that's how, you know, at different times, different places, they adopted things into systems and modified the craftsmanship, you know. And there are beautiful chairs, you know, not like this, but say, and it moves very well, right? And say, they have modified, they have added things into it. I think, say, chair is a good example to look at from the historical ones coming up to the present day. Say, how things have changed. That is, you know, any designer can really, you have to really see how it has come up from earlier time up to present day, and before get a proper understanding before designing for the future. That is how it goes.
Something very interesting that Basham, who was the Archaeological Commission of India, and he wrote that famous book, The Wonder of India. In that he mentions that Sri Lanka was prone to a lot of influences, but it only adapted and took what it wanted. It didn't take everything. It's almost like, I call it the Bulat Hape principle. Bulat Hape is, you know, your betel leaf. You chew it, you don't swallow the leaf, right? In the end you spit it out. So you only use what you want to use. And right through the history of this country, 2,500 years, they have only taken what they wanted. They never took what everybody brought in. So that's the uniqueness of this whole system, you know. And that if you understand that, then like Professor Nimal said, you can go forward. Right? And it's something that's acknowledged by all scholars, you know, that this is how it happened, and so on, you know. So I'm sorry if I was too rude in my first part, but basically I thought that's the only way it can go down well, and so on. Thank you.
I'm curious when you say that Sri Lanka took what worked and what didn't. I'm curious what it didn't. Because I'm
Now, say for example, if you look at architecture, the Sri Lankan architecture is suited for the climate. But if you look at the monasteries of India, right, they were like the Chaitya halls, okay, with the rooms right round and so on. And in fact, there were two buildings like that done in Sri Lanka also. One was at Meentale, for Arahat Mahinda, right? Because he didn't want to stay in the palace complex, he wanted a separate place, so they made one for him. Then there was another one that is actually even today behind or below the bund of the Tisavawa, behind the Tuparama. That was the house for Teri Sangamitta. Okay? Then what happened was, later on, when the Sangha increased in numbers, and people are getting older, and people are getting sick, they needed hospitals. So they looked at these two buildings and said, aha, ideal for a hospital. So then, those two buildings were actually converted into hospital because you had separate cells and so on. It had a courtyard. And then they introduced, what's this thing, those stone immersion baths and so on into the areas, and it became hospitals. Then they built exactly the same one in Polonnaruwa, right? Totally unsuitable for our climate, but it works for a hospital because you can isolate the people when they get sick and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that they took what they wanted, they took the materials that they wanted, and evolved a totally different architecture, because you don't get this architecture anywhere. You don't get it in India, right? But not even say Kerala, a lot of stuff in Kerala went from here. Because when the Cholas came down this way, okay, the Sinhalese went out that way into Kerala, right? And I have found a caste symbol. There is a paper of mine in the Royal Asiatic Journal where I worked this out, a caste symbol for the Sinhala. And all Keralas have a caste symbol, which they wear around their neck, okay? Now, if you have one person, you can't have a caste symbol. You must have thousands of them, right? So actually, it is actually for the caste symbol for the Sinhala Buddhists who went there. And they took the round temple, which was the Watadage from here, and constructed it there, okay? And if you look at it, it's only on the southwest side of Kerala. And I've analyzed these over a long period of time with a couple of other scholars in Kerala. And they all accept now that these are buildings that evolved from Sri Lanka, taken to Kerala. they originally had a stupa in the middle. Okay? But when the say, for example, the bhakti movements and all started coming down, it changed. Because bhakti is about one God, no? You know, not like the Hindu thing. So they took the stupa out and put Lord Vishnu in the middle. So now if you go to Kerala and you see the round temple, Lord Vishnu is there inside. You know? So these are things that you all have to learn. These are things that Sri Lanka contributed to the whole thing. So for me, the history of Sri Lanka is not a history of an island. It's a history of a region. Right? Sri Lankan craftsmen, actually Sri Lanka had ships, okay? And the Chinese have written beautifully about it. The Sri Lankan ships in the harbors of Shanghai, the biggest ships in the water at the time. When the Cholas came to Sri Lanka, they didn't have ships, they had boats. Okay? What did they do? When they came, they didn't come to settle, they came to pillage. They came to pillage the temples, right? So they pillaged the temples, put them into Sri Lankan ships and went out. Now they had ships. So they could go actually to South Asia. So actually if you analyze these in greater detail, you'll find that the whole system is a totally different story. You know? And then what happened? With the movement of the Cholas, then destroyed all the harbors, then took our ships. Then, for example, if you look at the way say, for example, the cities moved, it all came inland. And when it started coming from Polonnaru, it was always inland, then to Kotte and to Kandy and so on. You didn't need ships at that stage. Right? So even to get Upasampada in Siam, Dutch ships were used, no? To go and bring the priests and so on. So the story is very different. You all should be very proud of this history, you know, and look at it that way and see how it can be worked out, you know. Because the story is very, very different. You know, we are up to now only reading colonial books, no? Colonial history. That so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that. And I remember in school, we learned how Alfred burnt the cakes. We didn't learn anything else. Okay? But the story is very different. You know? I was very lucky. I had Harisan Aubud as one of my teachers. And he told me lots of stories. You know? So it's a very different story. So I think you all in your research should actually look at these things very differently and go deep into it. Like Nimal said, you know, you sat on the floor. The whole Kandy period, people sat on the floor. And that is up to the 15th century. People sat on the floor. Nobody had a chair. Whereas chairs were known because there were nuns who went from Sri Lanka to China. And China has chairs. They would have seen chairs. And then they came back. There was a movement of people going up and down. So they knew what chairs were. But it was unnecessary. You know, a chair is to make sure that your bottom doesn't get cold, no? When you sit on the floor. Okay? So that's all. And chairs were used, Egypt had chairs. The whole of the Middle East had chairs and so on. So it's a different story. We have to actually look at some of these things very differently, even in Europe, for example. Right? The concept of a chair is very recent. It never happened before. You know? If you look at British castles, they had big benches, you know. They didn't have chairs. So the story is very different. So that's why I said we have to change the name of this chair. It's not a planter's chair. Maybe it started with some planter somewhere. But it was actually a chair that you could relax on. You know. You could put your feet up. And it got very popular in the 19th century. When those big valavas were made, they had a hansi putua, and after a good rice meal, you could put your feet up and sleep. And that's what happened. Right? Now I am quite lucky that one of the original chairs is with I said there is a piece for a glass and so on, because the planters put a shot, you know. So for that, they need to keep their glass. Now, if you look at the present examples of the Hanjiputta, there's nowhere, no table, nothing, nowhere you can put a glass. They're all drinking. Where do they put the glass? So there was a second piece underneath, into which, with a hole, where you can keep your glass. So the whole system, so I think you have to go down very deep when you do these studies, rather than being, starting at some point. Like Nimal said, go deep, see how it started, and come back from that. See how it evolved, how the thinking changed, how the whole system evolved. And then you'll find that the story becomes very different, very, very different. Thank you. I'm sorry I took too much time.
Thanks.
One thing I would say, when you design something, it should be modern, but Sri Lankan modern. Remember that, say how things were, say we have beautiful background for design, right? And with that, see how when you learn, when you say do research and really find what it was, your thing will be really innovative design, but only a Sri Lankan can do that. That should be the attitude, not to follow all what is happening in every part of the world, but it must be modern, but Sri Lankan.
Before I open the questions out, Pauletta, I had one question, to pick up on what you had said about the importance of research and deep research, especially in the archives and things. What I found very interesting in what you had presented was your way of using an artistic practice to look at what is deep research. And I'm curious, and especially, we're being invited by the Integrated Design Research group here, which is obviously fairly multidisciplinary. My question really is, how do you feel that an artistic expression, such as what you have done, lends itself to, you've obviously shown in some ways, even literally, how you can focus on things in the archive. But beyond that, how does it actually lend itself to reveal things that are not just on a superficial level? What role really does art play?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think I see it beyond a single work, such as the one I just showed. I think artistic practice has, artists have this kind of role in society to kind of work with materials, with concepts, with ideas in a slightly different perspective, right? And I guess, yes, the work that I showed literally does that. But beyond that, I'm also very interested in opening up, looking at things, in this case, for example, photos from the archive with the subject of architecture, colonial architecture, but looking at it with many people and trying to go beyond the idea of what do I see as an artist, because that I feel is in the past. It's like the 19th century idea of what an artist is, so yeah, I often pose the question like, okay, when we are looking at archival materials, I look with my eyes and you are all looking with your eyes, but are we actually seeing the same thing? And yeah, for example, in workshops that I do with students and architects, artists, etc., we often try to work with materials and come up with many different stories, and also like try to narrate these stories into a new, story, narrative, which, opens up other perspectives. So that is the process going towards a work. In my case, often a video work, in which the idea is to open up the editing process, basically. But there's also an after process, in which the work becomes kind of a conversation piece, where we can sit around and talk through the work. And I found that especially in sensitive subjects, such as colonial history, for example, that can be very helpful, because you're not going into a one-to-one discussion in which people sometimes feel attacked, or like having to defend something. No, you can just talk through the work you see. And that really often helps in opening up discussions. And I see there also lies a big part of what artistic practice can do. So it's not only about the making, but also about the after effect of it, or the after discussion, or
Thank you. I hope that's of some sort of interest to the integrated design discipline here, of looking across disciplines at something like history. Before I open out to the audience for questions, I just want to say that I think, Ashley sir, we are all in agreement that we are going to change the name of the chair. In our research, we did come across close to about 15 to 20 different names, which went from Aram Kursi all the way to the more sort of slightly sleazy names, but we haven't yet sort of decided. We've actually referenced it as just the chair for the moment, just for convenience. But I'd like to open out to the audience if you'd like to comment or address any one person in the panel.
Thank you very much, madam. It's very informative. I want to know, you show the presentation and one slide, we can talk further if we like. Is it opium? Is they drinking opium or something? You show some slide in presentation.
Yeah.
You say we can, if we like, we can further discuss about it. You remember it?
Do you remember?
All photograph.
Sorry?
In your presentation, the old photograph, you can, you said that we can.
What is wrong with the? Yeah.
Not any wrong. It's opium. They're drinking opium or something.
No, they're not. Well, it could be. They were smoking. The hookahs had all forms of things, but clearly it was. The reason why we sort of put out that image is to speak of all the things that are wrong with that one image. One, of course, the person sitting, the posture that he's adopted, about 4 people who are actually serving him, one with a fly whisk, one serving him something, one's at his feet. So the whole idea of posture, the gender that's there are no women in the photograph, and that was something that we wanted to sort of bring out in that question. But it is possible that it had opium or some form of whatever they used to use in the hookah those days.
Okay, thank you, madam. I want to another thing to ask: the ergonomics and adaptations. How about the different regions, how
Yeah,
the
yeah.
adaptation of this planter's chair,
Yeah.
because it's what's about.
Yeah. So, well, when in our research, what we found is that there were very, very large versions in Bengal, in that area. We also think that was so because they were using chunky, what they call Burma teak. The craftsmanship, for some reason, even though there were Chinese craftsmen who came in, were not keen on the more ornate forms. We found many more ornate forms in, say, Gujarat, which had a lot of the chairs there were smaller. We also came across, because you're asking an ergonomic question, there's this version what some people call the ladies' chair. Like Mr. Ashley was saying, that there's a version which has a staggered armrest, which is lower, so women don't have to put their feet all the way up. So it's sort of lower. So it's also for people who are shorter. There are also versions where it's very, very difficult to get up from. It's not a very comfortable chair if you plan to, say, read. You can lie and stare at the ceiling or have a hookah or smoke or something like that. But you can't sit down and read. So in that sense, it's actually not a very ergonomically comfortable chair. There are versions which allow you to, say, move the back closer or lower the back a little bit, and those allow for some form of comfort, let's say.
Okay, thank you. Sir, මට ඇෂ්ලි සර්ගෙන් අහන්න තියෙන සර් අපේ මේ ඔය පුටුව කියන එක සර් පැහැදිලි කරා අර ගල් ආසන කියන එක මම හිතන්නේ හරි ටර්ම් එක ආසනද සර් පුටුව කියන එක පස්සේ කොලෝනියල් මේ කියන්නේ අධිරාජ්‍යවාදීත් එක්කනේ පුටුවක් කියන එක එන්නේ මම හිතන්නේ ඒක ගැන කොහොමද සර් අදහස? ඒක ට්‍රාන්ස්ලේට් කරන්න පුළුවන්ද මට මම ඉංග්‍රීසි
ආසන කියන එක හිටියේ දැන් මේ අපිට පල්ලෙහා එකක් තියෙනවා කොළඹුව කියලා. කොළඹුව කියන්නේ is a bench but a very thick bench, not out of this, that was the only one that was used, right? Rest were all normal on a mat or on a carpet you sit.
No, we got it. He's saying that they were low,
Yes.
they were sort of benches.
It's a say low-level bench called Colombo.
Is
And
it also
that's
called palekya?
Decorated, with all different formations, sometimes with legs, sometimes only 2 legs coming in. So it's the backrest was not generally used other than sitting on the ground. But say we have sculptures showing backrest with say round cushions, that is to give the comfort of it, but not as a chair, not as a seated chair. Sometimes they sit, they call Maharaja Leela, you put one leg on the other down, very comfortable and respectable sitting.
ඒක අපි ડોකියුමන්ට් කරලා තියෙනවද ලංකාවේ ඒ පරිණාමය හරි පුටුවේ ඒ පරිණාමය ડોකියුමන්ට් කරලා තියෙනවද කොහේ හරි මොන හරි තියෙනවද මූලාශ්‍ර වෙන බලන්න පුළුවන් මූලාශ්‍ර මොනවද තියෙන්නේ
මට තේරුන්නේ නැහැ කිව්වේ
වෙන මොනවද තියෙන මූලාශ්‍ර දැන් අපි ඔක ડોකියුමන්ට් කරලා තියෙනවා ලංකාවේ තුලේ පුටුව කියන එක කොහොමද පරිණාමය වුනේ කියන එක හරිය නැත්නම් ඒක වෙනස් වුනේ කොහොමද කියන එක මොකක් හරි ડોකියුමන්ට් කරලා තියෙනවද අපි ඒක රිසර්ච් කරලා තියෙනවද එහෙම තියෙනවා නම් ඒ ડોකියුමන්ට්ස් මොනවද සාමාන්‍ය අපිට බලන්න පුළුවන්
තියෙනවා. Because actually, when you are doing research, there are 3 avenues that you get. One is the literary information. Other one is material archaeological information. Third is the prevailing tradition on the subject. So when you put all 3 together, you get a lot of information, comparative information. That is how it should be.
Okay, thank you sir.
Actually, if you look at the Kavichi that you all are all familiar with, it's quite wide, right? That is because you sat with your feet up. You never had your feet down. You know, everybody sat on a cover chair, cross-legged. That's basically what happened. You know? So it was not, so that's why it's almost like a bed, no, it's so wide. Because of that, you know. Not for anything else. So we have actually changed, not only that, we are changing all our lifestyles and so on, and that's creating the confusion. You know? So next time you look at a kavichi, put your feet up and sit, and you'll find it very comfortable. Very, very comfortable. You know? And that is what it was meant for. You sat cross-legged on it. And actually the Hansi Putto that you see with the legs up was never for women. It was only men. Because it would be obscene for a woman to sit like that. So she never sat there. That was the house owner, the man in the house, that was his seat. So he sat there. You know, that extra piece I was talking about was actually for keeping a glass, you know. It was another little piece that you opened out with a hole, and you could keep your glass in that. Because in the evening you had a brandy or something like that, and you had to keep it somewhere, you know. So you got into that, you kept it in that hole. So that's all. So if you start analyzing your furniture like that, you will find the story is very different. Very, very different. You know? Even the veranda, for example, you know? What is a veranda? Where do we sit? You know, we today make a lot of noise about a veranda, but it's a totally different thing altogether, you know? So these are, I think, it's important, like Nimal was saying, that you go back to your roots when you examine these things, you know? And so on. And then you understand the whole story totally differently, because rather than starting from an X point, which somebody has written about, question that. Ask why. Why is it like that? You know? Why it should not be different? You know? So I think as the new people coming up, that's the very important way to go into research, you know. Start asking why. Why was this done this way? Couldn't have been done differently. And that's your integrated design programs, you know. Asking questions, why? I think this is very important, you know. Because otherwise you are taking over what somebody has said, and you're just going on from that, and actually doesn't mean anything. You know? So I think these are important aspects that you all should also carry away from, maybe, I don't know, somebody may have told this before, but certainly from this intercession, I think you should take away that as a possibility of going back into your root and trying to understand. Planter's chair, why planter's chair? Why was that chair necessary? Maybe the planter wants to put his feet up so that he frightens his servant or something like that. You know?
It's called the boot jack.
Yeah.
Because
So these are issues, you know?
take off their boots.
So I think our situations are very different. Thank you.
My question for all, right? When we are relating this to our context as I think all of us representing Gen Z, like we have seen this chair during our childhood. Most of the films or teledramas, this symbolize some kind of elite families, as Sir mentioned earlier. Like it became some kind of a symbolic element in Sri Lankan architecture of the colonial period. So I want to know, and I want to know your perspective on your research about that, how that symbolic meaning is similar in other areas of the region, or does it have another kind of a meaning, another symbolic meaning, as a, if we think about the usability or the function of the chair. So my perspective is like, I have seen this as a symbolic meaning with related to the elite families and elite that elite families formed after the colonial period, and they have used that this is an element for their verandas and stuff. So I want to know your perspectives. Yeah.
But actually, what is important is that the quality of the furniture was very different. You know, very fine workmanship. They were in ebony or nadung or buruta, which is satin wood, and so on. So it was all very fine workmanship. And say, for example, when you spoke about a symbolic relationship, when the man of the house, the Mudliya, sat down in his veranda with his feet up, people never even entered the house. They stood outside and spoke to him, and so on. So that was the power that he was executing, showing his power to everybody else as his importance in the whole system, So I think this is very important, and so on. Now, say, for example, if you want to look at two houses, there is the Dutch period museum in Prince Street, which actually was restored by me in 1977. It didn't have verandas, right? The house was built by Governor Van Ree, and it was on the mall, edge of the Bay Area. Okay? The veranda was added during the British period when it was used as a hospital, with separate staircases. The old staircase is still there, but new staircases added, right? Then if you look at the Dutch hospital, I restored that in 84. For example, it didn't have verandas. If you look at the original drawings, no verandas. They were added in the British period. So this symbolism, maybe they didn't use those sort of chairs, but it was to show some sort of power, and certainly if you went into an old walau and you saw the old man seated on the chair, you wouldn't just walk into the house. You would stop there and talk to him, and then he'll invite you in or something like that, So it was taken from the simplest forms and made into, and some of those ebony chairs are exquisite, The Hansi put was exquisite workmanship, fantastic workmanship, done in Gaul and places like that, Really beautiful. I don't think I answered your question, but I'm just trying to go around it in some way, where it is actually, it became a symbol of power, in the late British period. That is after 1880 and so on, when the walau started coming up and so on, and then these chairs were brought in as a symbol, and I mean, as you said, all the houses had it, and I remember we also had a few of those, but basically the thing was that it was a statement that I am here, So in other words, I am the man of the house, not anybody else, and so on,
Do you want this?
My question is for Sarita. And first of all, thank you very much for sharing all your research. My question comes in twofold, if I say. One is little bit of, I'm curious about your ontological standpoint as a researcher, somebody who's dealing with colonial history. And then the second one is build on that, a little bit on methodology. So first of all, if you look at British or modern period, if they're doing something, they were purifying things, you know, like this is British, this is Sri Lankan, this is Indian. And for me, in order to act or resist, if we take a nationalism as a concept, we are like looking back into the abyss, and it's not a correct direction to go for me, in my opinion. Instead of, it is a complex history, and how you perceive that particular era as a scholar. Are you like, for instance, trying to understand a realistic truth? This is what happened, this is really happened, or this is the Indian identity, or you have some sort of a different ideological point. And then based on that, for instance, if your idea is on recording complex history, for instance, there are a lot of memories on different perspectives, and are you trying to experiment on different methodologies that preserve that complexity instead of flattening out into a single narrative, again, same as British did?
You've asked a lot of questions. I think it was more than two. But yes, I'm going to answer the last bit of your thing in terms of methodology and things like that. Very much similar to what actually Pauletta was talking about, the idea of not having a sort of a singular dialogue with an archive or with research, but rather having a sort of a back and forth conversation in a sense. And to a very large extent, some of the, in this particular research project, what we've done is to allow for the voices that have emerged from our research, whether it is from looking at records, films. As I said, we even looked at Bollywood films and Malayalam films and of course Bengali films, Dutch films. We've had conversations with people, and as I said, we started calling it the Planter's Chair, but somewhere along the way we realized that there were so many different communities. For you in Sri Lanka, it is symbolic, as this gentleman said, of a particular landlord class of people. It's similarly in Kerala, where it's called the Charukasera. In Bengal, it's got its own character. A Parsi community, she, having traveled quite widely, was very surprised that it had other names. For her, it was only the Parsi chair, right? So, to a very large extent, we've allowed the conversations we've had, the sort of the glimpses we've got from the archives, whether it is from literatures, from photographs, from actual museum objects, to open out things. So we went in with a particular sort of thesis, so to speak, but we were ready to unpack those and dissect and do a complete turnaround. I think the way we've done that is different from, say, what Pauletta is doing, which is to allow an artistic medium, and you could add to this, to again look at history and the archives in a way that unpacks certain things that emerge from actually engaging with the archives. And I'm talking about archives in a very broad sense. Because artistic practice and, say, workshopping, where you allow, say, a bunch of us to, say, look at one object, each of us will look at that one object in a different way. We are all coming with our background of things. So I think practices like this are looking at a new way of looking at research, you know. They're not just, yes, of course, they are grounded in looking at history, they are grounded in looking at a sequential understanding of what was and looking at what is. But beyond that, they're also allowing, I think, voices to emerge, which is not one which was guided by, say, whether it's colonial power, gender issues, caste, class, all that sort of thing. So it's a bit more democratic, in my opinion. And I feel that that's where research is, well, I like the way the way the research is going. It's still grounded in hard work and grit and data crunching and all that, but it's still, it allows for voices. I've forgotten your first question.
Yeah, I can add a bit because maybe what I didn't say before, but a big part of artistic practice is also the idea of speculation, right? And I think within academia, that is always something that is not really valued because it's not objective or objectified. But actually, of course, academia, I mean, the Western form of what academia is, and that has kind of gone all over, doesn't allow for many forms that can be considered research or history as well, because it is very, one-way directed, and if it's not done like that, then it's not considered, academic research or something. And I think indeed now what many, younger scholars or like or artists that become scholars, or I don't know, like the cross-disciplinary research forms, they are very much looking indeed for ways to open up what is research and how can we value things in a different light. And then you see that, I don't know, like stories about ghosts that inhabit buildings can be actually also seen as forms of maybe collective history, or or of course oral history is a form that is already kind of more used also in academia, but to speculate what could have been is very necessary, because the stories, I don't know, about slavery, about servants in the domestic environment, about, all those stories, you will not find them in the archive, because the archive has been created from a very, colonial Western kind of perspective. So if we want to break that down, if we want to decolonize whatever, we have to also ask, how do we do the research? And what can we consider as research? And and also break that open and bring it also here in the university.
If you're particularly interested in something like this, I mean, there is an entire field of public history which is to do with history that is made more practice-based and which opens up ways of engaging with the public. So,
excuse me. Yes, my question is going to Palota. Here. Yes, just to figure out for myself, right? So, can I know your research objective? Why you are doing this research? I mean, so what is the ultimate goal to know about? I mean, you are studying about the resting chair, right?
sorry?
For her.
I also cannot hear the question.
So your study is based on the resting chair.
Is based on what?
Is the chair?
The chair?
Yes, planter chair.
That's Sarita's research. Yeah.
Okay. So then I have to know what are the objectives did you find out? So what is your ultimate goal as a researcher? So I don't know whether you are going to know about the functional validity or the artistic value, or what is the final outcome you expected?
Well, as I said earlier, my earlier research was looking at the object, which is the seat.
Just only a seat?
Yeah. So it was a longer research project which just looked at the seat. And the reasoning for that was really because as a cultural object, the seat or the chair, whether it's the palikya that you were talking about, the low seat or all the way, allows you to see a whole trajectory of cultural change that happens. So by using one object, very much like what Nirmal sir is saying, that you can use one object to talk about the larger issues that are of interest from a design, from a cultural perspective, but also connecting it to a larger anthropological study of what it meant in terms of a political history, a national history, or what does it mean in terms of an identity, how an object can actually has agency. So in my belief, an object has agency. It can actually bring people together. It can be used the way Gandhi has used the baitak or the floor seat as a means to sort of defy a colonial attitude or a disregard for an Eastern way of living, say. Right? So yes, the research in a sense uses one object to look at larger issues of cultural and design history.
So that's my question is based on the product design point of view. So then that's mean you are not going to study about the ergonomical factors like those things.
So it's not what's called a craft documentation.
I said craft documentation.
It's not a documentation from a design perspective of, say, what is the object, or what is the material, what is the technique used, and things like that. It's more of a cultural and anthropological study. You do look at material objects from a material perspective, that is a material culture perspective. That means you understand that, say, Burma teak was used at a particular time in history, and then soon after it became what they call CP, which is Central Province teak. So that immediately tells you about how, say, trade happened from Burma to India, and of course all the way to South India as well, for a long period of time. But when you start unraveling and saying that, okay, why was a different type of teak used, and what does it tell you? Then you suddenly are looking at history by looking at the object. So you can look at it top down or bottom down. You can sort of say this is the history of a nation, and the nation had so many sort of, say, objects and people in it. Or you can look at one person or one object and then look at your larger history.
Some sort of a comparison.
It's more of a learning, I think, back and forth from each other.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to ask one question. It's like I see this chair as a product. As we look at it in product design perspective, I think it's a multifunctional chair. So because even though it comes from with the changing of the time, I think the need of relaxation of the person is still existing. So as modernizing this chair, what are the things that we can inspire from this chair to design the next level of this chair? So because I have identified that even though the cast and even though we don't do any plantations, so human need relaxation. So even with the period of time changing, still that need is existing. So I think it's better area to study on looking at it as a product perspective. If you can give us an idea as to how to develop this to matching with the current human needs in current modern societies.
Is that question to me? Or
yeah, it's question to architecture background. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow the whole question, but what is there that, why is it that you have to make everything modern? What is modern?
I meant that the change of the needs, like because lifestyle changing, because of the lifestyle changing, the people, the relaxing time and the way of relaxing can be changed. So
no, that's true, but say for example, why do you want to take an existing thing which works very well and modernize that?
No, I just wanted, I'm just asking how to match with the lifestyle. Like
Yeah, but can't you do something else which does the same thing?
it can do.
And you can call it modern.
Yeah. Yes, but I'm just asking way of inspiring, because I feel there is a good, it is a good inspiration to design another is not another, match with the need of relaxing.
No, you know,
Because people use different type of relaxing methods. So I think this is much very simple way of thing to relax that because it gives a hybrid mood. Like if you sit on that chair after having a good meal, so you don't get a long time sleep. You can take 1 hour, 2 hour, like it's just like an alarm. So it's a kind of, it's a good inspiration to modern life, if we can match with the modern life. So I think there is some point.
I think first you must define what modern life is, you know. The other thing is that if you look at Europe is focused thinking. They go along a straight line. You're part of a tradition of lateral thinkers, you know. You're thinking all over, you're getting things from all over, you know, it's not a focused line. So the chances of doing something exceptional is very high with a lateral thinking, brain, which is actually floating around all over, bringing lots of stuff in. So I think we must get away from this concept of modern. What is modern? I wear a pair of shoes, is that modern? I can come barefooted, which is possibly more healthy. To me, that would be more modern. You know? So I think we shouldn't get too tied up in some of these terms, you know, because I think that's half the problem. Now, say, for example, you have the planter's chair. That's why I suggested we should change the name, you know. And if it evolves, and everything has been evolving, nothing has been static. If you look at the whole history of mankind, everything has evolved. But coloniality keeps it in a straight line. That is the difference. But we are part of a lateral thinking system, you know. And that is very, very highly modern, actually, if you can think laterally, rather than along a straight line, you know. PhD, straight line, focused. But, you know, we can move around all over and do a lot more things, much more exciting. And I think that's what you all should try to develop, you know, rather than getting stuck in a line. Get off the line. When the train stops, get off and walk, you know. So I think these are, get away from these terms like modern and all. I mean, it has really no meaning. You know, 10 years ago, the things they were doing were modern. Today, what we are doing is also, you can call it modern, but forget about these terms, you know, and evolve new terms for them, you know, and move away from all this, you know. Don't get stuck in these little cliches, you know, and so on. I'm sorry if I was rude, but that's basically what it is.
Sumantri, should we close? I think we've kind of, thank you so much, panelists. Thank you for your inputs. Thank you, Pauletta.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I think there was a very illuminating conversation, I would say. And of course, you know, reminding us that, you know, objects, just like the spaces that they inhabit, are, you know, never static in their meaning, as we explored today, and that they, you know, continue to evolve, you know, carrying stories of our past. And, you know, while also talking about conversations about our present and, you know, what it can mean for the future as well. And also, as Pauletta said, you know, it's also about valuing things in a different light, right? So thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining in this conversation today. I think it's been a late night, and that brings us to the end of day 2 of IDR 2024. Before we conclude, I would like to invite our conference chair, Dr. Sumantri Samaravikrama, together with the head of the Department of Integrated Design, over onto the stage to present some tokens of appreciation to our invited experts here on stage, as well as Sarita and Paoletta. A huge thank you goes to Sarita Sundar, who has come all the way from Bangalore. Thank you very much, and also Paoletta, host, who came in all the way from Brussels. You know, amidst a lot of challenges today, you don't know half of it, but you know, we've managed. So thank you so much for both of your presence here this evening. And also a huge thank you goes out to our invited experts who are here today, architect Ashley DeVos and Professor Nimal De Silva. Thank you so much. If I can invite our conference chair and the head of the department to present some tokens of appreciation. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you very much. I think it was a very much needed conversation, and thank you to the audience as well for participating as well. Thank you so much. Shall we give a round of applause to all of our panelists? Thank you so very much. A huge thank you to the audience as well. Of course, tomorrow is another day, the final day of IDR 2024. And we start off with a very special research chat with Dr. Delina. And we also have a panel discussion titled Heritage Reimagined, Craft Design and Contemporary Narratives, which will also take place tomorrow, together with a workshop on crafting type. So we do hope you can join in for those things as well. And we can conclude? Yeah. So with that, we say thank you very much for joining us today, and have a wonderful evening ahead. Good night. Thanks a lot.